The stars do not remember us. This is the first truth every Velathari child learns when they are old enough to understand the weight of eternity. We are taught to look upward, into that endless black canvas scattered with ancient light, and know that every civilization that has ever risen has also fallen, and the stars simply continued burning, indifferent to the screaming.
I am Kalen Vor Sethis, seventh archivist of the Velathari Eternal Chroniclon, keeper of 12,000 years of recorded memory. I have spent 4 centuries cataloging the rise and extinction of species across 17 galactic arms. I have documented the sublime architecture of the meridian spires before the hollowing consumed them. I have preserved the last songs of the Kethrani before their sun devoured their world.
I believed, with the quiet arrogance of the truly ancient, that I understood endings.
I understood nothing. What I am about to record is not merely history. It is confession. It is warning. And perhaps, if any survive to read these words, it is testament to the species we dismissed as primitive, as dangerous, as unworthy of our attention. The species that answered when we finally, desperately called.
The species called humanity. But I am getting ahead of myself. Forgive an old archivist his scattered thoughts. Even now, 3 solar cycles after the events I must describe, my hands tremble when I attempt to organize the memories. Not from age, from something far more unsettling.
From awe.
Let me begin where all endings truly begin, at the moment we realized we were dying.
The Velathari sovereignty had endured for 19,000 standard years. Our territory spanned 412 habitable worlds across 3 galactic arms. Our fleet numbered in the hundreds of thousands. Our technology had long ago transcended the crude mechanical limitations that plague younger species. We had mastered gravitational manipulation, quantum consciousness transfer, stellar engineering on scales that would shatter lesser minds to contemplate.
We were, by any objective measure, gods walking among children.
And then the Kethvorin came.
Not from any direction we had mapped, not from any region our sensors monitored. They emerged from the spaces between, from dimensional folds our greatest theorists had deemed mathematically impossible. They came in ships that hurt to perceive, geometries that induced madness in those who studied them too long. They did not communicate. They did not negotiate.
They consumed.
The first 17 worlds fell in a single cycle. 43 billion Velathari simply gone. Not dead. That would imply remains, evidence, something to mourn. They were unmade, erased from existence as if they had never drawn breath. Our fleets responded with every weapon in our considerable arsenal. We deployed stellar destabilizers. We collapsed local space-time. We sacrificed 3 of our own suns to generate antimatter cascades that should have sterilized entire sectors.
The Kethvorin did not slow.
Within a year, we had lost 108 worlds. Within 3, 267. Our population, which had numbered into trillions, contracted like a dying star. Refugees flooded toward our core systems, bringing stories that grew worse with each telling. The High Council convened in permanent session. I attended as the official chronicler, though I confess my hands shook too badly to record much of what I witnessed. Supreme Counselor Vetharan, eldest of our ruling body at over 2,000 years, looked older than the galaxy itself. His luminescent skin had dimmed to the gray of cooling ash. When he spoke,
His voice carried the weight of civilizational collapse.
We must consider the unthinkable.
The council chamber fell silent. We all knew what he meant, though none wished to speak it aloud.
We must seek aid from the younger species.
Counselor Marathon rose, her forearms rigid with barely contained fury. You would have us grovel before primitives, beg assistance from species that were painting on cave walls when we were engineering stars? I would have us survive, Vetheron replied, exhaustion stripping the authority from his words. The Meridian Collective has fallen. The Kethrani are extinct. The Hollow Ones, the Star Singers, the Architects of Reason, all consumed. We have contacted every elder species in this galactic region. None remain to answer. And you believe these children can succeed where gods have failed? I believe we are out of options. The debate continued for 3 cycles. I documented every word, every objection, every desperate justification. In the end, survival outweighed pride. Barely. The vote passed by a margin of 3. We would reach out to the younger species. We would humble ourselves before creatures we had spent millennia ignoring, studying from a distance like particularly interesting insects. And we would pray, though to whom I could not say, that one among them might offer something other than sympathy for our dying. It was Counselor Marathon, in a final act of bitter irony, who suggested the humans. If we must demean ourselves, she said, her voice dripping with contempt, let us at least choose entertaining failures. The humans are violent, short-lived, and prone to self-destruction. They have achieved faster-than-light travel through methods so crude they border on suicidal. Their society is fractured into hundreds of competing factions that cannot agree on basic governing principles. They will accomplish nothing, but their inevitable failure might at least amuse us in our final days. No one laughed. But neither did anyone object. I was selected to lead the diplomatic envoy, an archivist, not a warrior or statesman. I believe the council expected me to document our humiliation for posterity, assuming any posterity would exist to read it. I accepted the assignment without protest. By then I had grown too tired to argue.
Too tired for anything except the mechanical continuation of duty.
The journey to human-controlled space took 14 cycles. We traveled in the Whisper of Ending, a diplomatic vessel designed for comfort rather than combat, a decision I questioned as we passed the expanding border of Kethvaran corruption, that wrongness in space itself that marked their territory. But we were not attacked. Perhaps we were too insignificant to notice. Perhaps they were saving us for later, the way a child might save a favored treat. I spent the journey reviewing everything our archivist had recorded about humanity. It was not encouraging. They had achieved sentience approximately 200,000 years ago, a blink by Velathari standards. They had spent most of that time killing each other in increasingly creative ways. Their planet had experienced 5 mass extinction events before they evolved, and they seemed determined to cause a 6th through environmental destruction. They had invented nuclear weapons before developing a unified global government, which struck me as perhaps the most damning evidence of their unsuitability for galactic civilization.
Their first contact with alien life had occurred only 300 years prior, when a Merchants Guild vessel made an unauthorized landing in one of their population centers. The humans had responded with a mixture of panic, violence, and, inexplicably, commercial proposals. Within a decade, they had reverse-engineered the Guild's propulsion technology and begun expanding into space with a recklessness that alarmed every elder species who bothered to notice.
The Velithari response had been typical of our approach to younger species, benign neglect. We observed, we documented, we occasionally intervened to prevent them from accidentally destroying something valuable, but we did not engage. They were too young, too volatile, too temporary to warrant serious attention.
Besides, our models predicted they would likely destroy themselves within the next millennium anyway.
Now I was traveling to beg for their help. The irony was not lost on me. We entered human-controlled space at their designated checkpoint, a modest station orbiting a yellow star they called Sol. I had expected something primitive, crude metal structures perhaps, held together with visible welding and optimistic engineering. What I found was functional, efficiently functional. The station was neither beautiful nor ugly. It simply worked, every component serving an obvious purpose, nothing wasted on aesthetics or intimidation. This troubled me in ways I could not immediately articulate. A human vessel approached to escort us to the station. It was small by our standards, perhaps a tenth the size of the Whisper of Ending. Its hull was scarred with micrometeorite impacts and what appeared to be weapons damage, patches of slightly different colored metal marking repairs. It looked like a tool that had seen heavy use, a tool that had survived heavy use.
Velithari vessel, a voice came through our communication system, calm and unhurried. This is UES Persistent. We've received your diplomatic codes. Please follow our heading to Docking Bay 7. Station Commander Chen is waiting to receive you.
The voice belonged to a woman, I would later learn. Captain Yuki Tanaka, commander of the Persistent. She would become important. They would all become important. But at that moment, she was simply a voice, professional, polite, utterly unremarkable. We docked without incident. The process was efficient but not rushed, every step clearly designed for safety rather than spectacle. A small delegation waited to receive us, 5 humans in matching gray uniforms, standing in a precise formation that spoke of military discipline. At their head was a woman of perhaps 50 standard years, elderly by human measurements, though she moved with the easy confidence of someone who had not yet noticed their mortality. "Archivist Vorsethis," she said, inclining her head slightly. "I'm Commander Sarah Chen. On behalf of the United Earth Systems, welcome to Haven Station. We've prepared quarters for your delegation and scheduled a preliminary meeting for when you're rested from your journey." She paused, studying me with eyes that seemed to miss nothing. "Unless you would prefer to speak immediately." I had prepared a formal greeting, a carefully crafted statement of Velithari superiority, tempered by the unfortunate necessity of seeking assistance. It died in my throat. Something about her gaze, about the patient silence of her delegation, made ceremonial posturing feel absurd. "I would prefer to speak immediately," I heard myself say. "My people are dying, Commander. Every moment of rest is a moment we can ill afford." She nodded once, as if this was exactly the response she had expected. "Then follow me." We walked through corridors that were clean, well-maintained, and utterly without ornamentation. No artwork, no displays of achievement or conquest, just functional lighting, functional walls, functional people moving with purposeful efficiency. I passed humans of various ages, skin tones, and apparent ethnic backgrounds, all wearing variations of the same gray uniform. They glanced at us with curiosity, but without fear, without awe. This troubled me as well. The meeting room was equally austere,
A long table, simple chairs, a single display screen on one wall. Commander Chen took a seat at one end and gestured for me to sit across from her. Her delegation arranged themselves along the sides, not as attendants, I realized, but as participants, equals.
"Before we begin," she said, "I want to establish something clearly. We know why you're here. We've been monitoring the Kethvaran expansion since it began. We know about the losses the Velathari have suffered. We know about the Meridian Collective, the Kethrani, the others."
I felt my primary heart stutter. "You know? You have observed our destruction and done nothing?"
Her expression did not change. We observed, we analyzed, we prepared, and we waited.
Waited for what? For you to ask. The silence that followed was uncomfortable. I found myself studying her face, searching for mockery or cruelty, or the simple satisfaction of watching an ancient enemy humbled. I found none of these things. Her expression was patient, attentive, and absolutely unreadable.
"You could have offered," I said finally. "When the Meridian fell, when billions died, you could have. Would you have accepted?" The question hung in the air. We both knew the answer. The Velathari would never have accepted help from humans when alternatives remained. We would have been offended by the offer. We might have responded with hostility.
"No," I admitted, "we would not." She nodded again, that same small motion of acknowledgement. "Then our offer would have accomplished nothing except to damage the relationship we might need later, when you were ready to listen." "And now we are ready."
"You're here." I wanted to be angry. I wanted to rage at her pragmatic calculation, her species' willingness to let billions die while waiting for the political moment to ripen. But I found I could not summon the energy. She was right. We would not have listened. We would have refused, and our refusal would have been remembered when we finally, desperately needed them. This was not cruelty, I realized. It was patience. The patience of a species that had learned, perhaps through their own violent history, that help forced upon the unwilling accomplishes nothing. "What can you offer?" I asked, abandoning all pretense of diplomatic positioning. "The Kethvaran have destroyed elder species far more advanced than humanity. Your technology, your military capability, no offense intended, Commander, but you are children playing with toys while gods wage war. What can you possibly contribute that the Meridian Collective, with 100,000 years of advancement, could not?" A slight smile crossed her face, the first real emotion I had seen from her. It was not a pleasant smile. It was the smile of someone who knows something you do not, something you might not want to learn. "May I ask you a question, Archivist?" "Of course. In your 4 centuries of documenting civilizations, how many have you recorded that arose from a death world?" I blinked, unsure of her meaning. "A death world?" "A planet where the environment itself is hostile to intelligent life, where predators hunt the dominant species, where disease, natural disaster, climate variation, and competition for resources create constant selective pressure, where survival is not guaranteed but must be earned every generation through adaptation, cooperation, and will." I searched my memory. In 4 centuries of archival work, I had documented thousands of species origins. Most arose from stable worlds, paradises of abundant resources and minimal threat. The ones that didn't, the ones from harsh environments, tended to be aggressive, short-lived, and prone to self-destruction before achieving interstellar capability. "Very few," I admitted, "and none that survived long." "Earth is a death world," she said calmly. 70% of our surface is covered in water we cannot breathe.
Our atmosphere regularly generates storms capable of destroying cities. Our planet experiences regular extinction-level events from asteroid impacts, supervolcanic eruptions, and ice ages. We evolved alongside predators that viewed us as food. We developed intelligence not because our environment was kind, but because it was merciless.
She leaned forward slightly, and for a moment I saw something in her eyes that made my secondary heart skip.
Every human alive is the descendant of survivors. Every one of us carries the genetic legacy of ancestors who faced extinction and refused to die. We did not evolve in paradise, Archivist. We evolved in a crucible, and that changes things.
Changes what things?
What we're willing to endure. What we're capable of when survival is at stake. What we become when pushed to our limits. She sat back. The Meridian Collective was old, wise, sophisticated, but they had not fought for survival in 100,000 years. Their instincts had atrophied. When faced with an enemy that could not be reasoned with, could not be bought, could not be frightened, they did not know how to adapt.
I wanted to dismiss this as bravado, the desperate posturing of a young species that did not understand the scale of what it faced. But something in her certainty, the absolute calm with which she discussed extinction-level threats, gave me pause.
You speak as if you have already formed a strategy, I said.
We began developing contingencies when the Kefvoren first appeared. We didn't know when we'd be asked to use them, but we knew we'd be asked eventually.
Why?
Because the elder species were failing, and someone would need to step in. She shrugged. It's happened before. On Earth, I mean. Dominant species fail, ecosystems collapse, and then something new rises from the margins, something that the old order overlooked or dismissed. Her eyes met mine. Something that was adapting while they were dying.
I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the station's temperature. You planned for this.
We hoped we wouldn't need to. We would have preferred the elder species to solve the problem. But hope is not a strategy. She stood. I think you should rest now, Archivist. What we're going to propose will require a clear mind to process, and you look like you haven't slept properly in months.
She was right. I hadn't.
The quarters they provided were simple but comfortable. A bed, a cleansing unit, a window overlooking the stars. I lay in the darkness and watched the distant points of light, thinking about everything I had learned and everything I feared. I had come expecting to find primitives playing its civilization. What I had found instead was something I did not have a category for. The humans were not advanced by Velathari standards. Their technology was crude, their lifespans brief, their history laughably short. But there was something in their manner, a quiet confidence, an absence of display, that unsettled me more than any boast of superiority could have. They did not need to prove themselves. They did not care what I thought of them. They simply continued, calm and focused, preparing for whatever came next. It occurred to me that I had never actually seen a human display fear. Not the docking crew, not Commander Chen, not Captain Tanaka on the Persistent. They had been professional, attentive, courteous, but never afraid, even when discussing the destruction of civilizations. This, I decided, was the most frightening thing of all. The next morning, or what passed for morning on a station with no natural day cycle, I was summoned to a larger meeting room. The human delegation had expanded significantly. In addition to Commander Chen, there were now perhaps 30 individuals seated around an extended table, representing what I would later learn were different branches of human governance, military, science, and what they called strategic integration. More notable was the display that dominated one wall, a three-dimensional map of Velathari space, updated in real time with data I recognized as coming from our own military networks. "Before we proceed," Commander Chan said, "we need to understand exactly what we're dealing with. Archivist Vorsis, we have our own intelligence on the Kethvoran, but your direct experience would be invaluable. Can you tell us what your people have learned about them?"
I spent 3 hours detailing everything we knew, their dimensional origins, their apparent biology, if biology was even the correct term, their tactics, their expansion patterns, their complete non-response to every form of communication we had attempted, their weapons, which seemed to operate on principles that violated our understanding of physics, their ships, which induced psychological distress in anyone who observed them for too long. The humans listened in silence. They took notes. They asked questions that were incisive, specific, and demonstrated a depth of prior analysis I had not expected. They were not learning from scratch. They were filling in gaps in knowledge they had already developed. "You've been studying them," I said finally. "For how long?"
"Since they first appeared," said a young man I had not noticed before, thin, pale, with the distracted look of someone whose mind was always partially elsewhere. "I'm Dr. Marcus Webb, theoretical physics. We detected the dimensional disturbance when the Kethvoran emerged. It created ripples in local spacetime that our deep space sensors picked up. We've been analyzing those readings ever since."
"And what have you learned?"
He glanced at Commander Chen, who nodded. "They're not from another dimension in the sense we typically use the term. They're from a collapsed probability space, a timeline that failed, a universe that ended. They exist in the gaps between what is and what might have been. And they're hungry."
"Hungry for what?"
"Existence, reality, the thing they lost when their universe collapsed. They're not conquering your world's archivist. They're not even really destroying them. They're consuming the probability of their existence, erasing them from the possibility space of the multiverse."
I felt my stomachs clench. This was worse than anything our theorists had proposed. Then how do you fight them? How do you fight something that doesn't truly exist? "You don't fight them the way you've been fighting." Dr. Webb's voice was calm, almost gentle. "Conventional weapons, energy-based attacks, even your space-time manipulations, these all target things that exist within normal probability space. The Kethvoran don't. Hitting them with antimatter is like trying to kill a shadow by shooting at the wall." "Then what?" "You target their anchor." He brought up a complex diagram on the display. "They need something to tether them to our reality, a probability bridge. Without it, they dissipate back into the collapsed space they came from. We've identified the structures that serve this function in their ships. Destroy those, and they can't maintain coherence in our universe."
"How did you determine this?"
"By thinking about what we would need if we were in their situation." He smiled slightly. "Humanity has a long tradition of putting ourselves in the minds of our enemies. It's how we survived each other long enough to reach the stars." I stared at the diagram, trying to reconcile what I was hearing with my expectations. The Velathari had studied the Kethvoran for years. Our greatest minds had dedicated themselves to understanding the threat, and we had found nothing. These humans, with their brief lifespans and crude instruments, had identified a weakness in months. "Why didn't you share this information?" I asked. "When the Meridian fell, when billions were dying, why didn't you tell us?"
Commander Chen answered.
"We tried. Through informal channels, academic exchanges, anonymous data packets. The Meridian dismissed our analysis as juvenile speculation. The Kethrani acknowledged receipt and never responded. Your own High Council filed our communications as unsolicited advice from a pre-elder species and archived them without review. I felt heat rise in my facial ridges. Shame. Shame that my people's arrogance had cost billions of lives. Shame that we had been offered salvation and rejected it because of who was offering. "I see," I said quietly. "Don't." Her voice was firm but not unkind. "Don't apologize for your civilization's choices. You're not responsible for decisions made before you had influence. What matters now is what we do going forward." She turned to the display, manipulating it to show the current Kethvoran expansion. "They're approximately 6 months from reaching your core systems. Based on their current consumption rate, the Velathari sovereignty has perhaps 1 year before complete extinction." Hearing it stated so plainly felt like a physical blow. "However," she continued, "if we implement our countermeasures effectively, we believe we can halt their advance within 3 months, push them back within 6, and eliminate them entirely within 18. I wanted to believe her. Desperately, I wanted to believe that this small, young species had somehow solved what had killed ancient gods, but I could not silence the skeptic within. "What countermeasures? Your fleet is a fraction of what the Meridian fielded. Your technology, forgive me, is generations behind ours. How can you possibly—" "Show him," Commander Chen said. The display changed. What I saw silenced my objections in my throat. Ships. Thousands of ships. Not the crude vessels I had observed at the station, but something new, sleek, angular, designed with a predatory efficiency that made the whisper of ending look like a child's toy. They were gathered at staging points throughout human space, arranged in formations I didn't recognize. They were still, waiting. "The UES Shadow Fleet," Commander Chen said. "Officially, it doesn't exist. Unofficially, we've been building it for the past 50 years. Every major human faction contributed. Earth, the Colonial Authority, the Frontier Confederacy, even the independent systems. We don't agree on much, Archivist. We argue constantly about governance, economics, culture, philosophy. But we agreed on this." I scanned the formations, trying to count. How many? 42,000 combat vessels, 200,000 support and logistics ships, 80 billion personnel across all branches of service. The number staggered me. Human population records indicated perhaps 300 billion individuals across their colonies. They had mobilized over a quarter of their entire species. "This is impossible," I breathed. "The economic strain alone, the social disruption—" "Was considerable." She nodded. Birth rates dropped. Luxury production ceased. Every able-bodied adult who wasn't essential for food production or childcare was drafted into either military service or support industries. We've been on a war footing for half a century, Archivist, waiting for a war that might never come. But why? You had no guarantee the Kethvoran would reach you. The elder species might have stopped them. You might have spent 50 years preparing for nothing. We might have. Her eyes met mine. But we didn't. And now we're ready. Ready to die, I said softly. That's what this is. A species-wide commitment to sacrifice. Ready to fight, she corrected. Ready to win if possible. Ready to die making the enemy pay if not. But ready. That's the important part. Whatever comes, we won't face it wondering if we could have done more. I thought about the Meridian Collective, caught off guard despite their vast resources. The Kethrani, who had debated response options while their worlds burned. My own people, who had spent years in denial before finally accepting the need for outside help. None of us had been ready. We had believed our age and advancement would protect us, that threats requiring actual preparation were beneath our concern. The humans had believed no such thing. They had assumed the worst and prepared accordingly. "There's something else," Dr. Webb said. "Something we haven't shown anyone yet." He changed the display again. A single vessel appeared, larger than anything else I had seen, larger than anything I could have imagined. It dwarfed the human capital ships, like an adult beside infants. Its design was unlike anything else in the human fleet. Organic curves, surfaces that seemed to shift and flow, a faint luminescence that pulsed like a heartbeat.
"What is that?"
We call it the Judgment. His voice had gone quiet, almost reverent. It's built around a theoretical framework we developed from studying the Kephivoran. If they exist in the gaps between probability spaces, then it should be possible to target those gaps directly, to collapse the dimensional anchors that keep them tethered to our reality, not one at a time, but all at once.
A weapon to destroy them all simultaneously?
If it works. He glanced at Commander Chen.
We haven't tested it at scale. We can't. The energy requirements would be detectable across half the galaxy. We've run simulations, built smaller prototypes, validated the theory as far as we can, but we won't know if it truly works until we use it.
"And if it doesn't?"
Commander Chen answered. "Then 42,000 ships and 80 billion soldiers will buy time for our civilian population to evacuate deeper into space. The Kethvoran will eventually find them. Eventually, humanity will fall, but not today. Not easily, and not without making the bastards earn every inch."
I sat in silence, processing what I had been told. These humans had spent 50 years preparing for extinction. They had built weapons in secret, sacrificed comfort and prosperity, mobilized their entire species for a fight that might never come. And now they were prepared to throw everything they had at an enemy that had consumed ancient gods, with no guarantee of success.
Not for themselves, for us, for the galaxy, for the principle that some things were worth fighting for, even when victory seemed impossible. Why? I asked finally. Why would you do this for species that ignored you, that dismissed you, that would have let you die without a second thought?
Commander Chen was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was soft but certain. Because someone had to. Because if not us, then who? The elder species were too proud to adapt, too comfortable to prepare, too ancient to remember what it meant to fight for survival. But we remember. We've never stopped remembering. She paused. Humans have a saying, Archivist. The cavalry isn't coming. It means that when everything falls apart, you can't count on anyone to save you. You have to save yourself, or die waiting for rescue that will never arrive. Then why are you rescuing us? Because we're the cavalry now. Because we spent our whole history as the ones who needed saving, and no one came. And we decided, when we finally reached the stars, that we would be different. That when someone called for help, we would answer. Another smile, this one carrying ancient pain. Even if we had to wait for them to be ready to accept it. I had no response. For 4 centuries I had documented the rise and fall of civilizations, the grand arcs of history that reduced individual lives to footnotes. I had never seen anything like this. A species so young, so fragile, so seemingly insignificant, preparing to sacrifice itself for a galaxy that had shown it only contempt. "What do you need from us?" I asked. "Coordination. Your fleet remnants will need to integrate with our command structure. Your knowledge of Kethvoran-occupied space will help us plan our approach, and—" she hesitated. "We need your people to believe."
Believe? That victory is possible, that fighting is worthwhile, that extinction is not inevitable. The Velethari have been dying for years, Archivist, not just physically, spiritually. Your people have given up. They're waiting for the end, going through the motions of survival without hope. We can bring the weapons, the ships, the soldiers, but hope? She shook her head. That has to come from within. Your people have to choose to live. I thought of my colleagues on the High Council, gray and exhausted, debating the terms of extinction. I thought of the refugees flooding toward core systems, eyes empty, spirits broken. I thought of myself, accepting this mission as a final duty rather than a genuine attempt to find salvation.
We had already died, I realized. We had died the moment we stopped believing survival was possible. Our bodies simply hadn't caught up with our spirits.
"I will try," I said. "I will return to my people and tell them what I have learned. I will tell them that hope remains, that allies have come, that the darkness can be pushed back." I paused. I do not know if they will believe me. I do not know if I believe myself, but I will try. Commander Chen nodded. "That's all we can ask." What I found instead was desperation so profound that even impossible hope seemed worth grasping. The first human ships arrived at our staging areas within a week. They were not the massive vessels I had been shown. Those remained hidden, waiting for the proper moment. These were smaller craft, support ships and communication relays, crewed by humans who integrated with our command structure with a professionalism that startled our officers. They did not demand authority. They did not posture or assert dominance. They simply asked where they could be useful and set to work with quiet efficiency. Our commanders, expecting arrogance from the upstart species, found something far more unsettling: competence without ego, capability without display. I spent those months traveling between fleets, observing, documenting, trying to understand what I was witnessing. I watched human engineers repair Velethari vessels in half the time our own technicians required, using tools they had fabricated on the spot. I watched human tactical officers propose maneuvers that our simulations showed would fail, until they demonstrated variables we hadn't considered, approaches that relied on unconventional thinking rather than superior technology. I watched, most disturbingly of all, the humans drill for combat in the Kethvoran style. They had studied the enemy's attack patterns, their dimensional folding techniques, the psychological effects of prolonged exposure to their impossible geometry. And they had developed countermeasures, not just technological, but mental. Human soldiers trained in special facilities designed to mimic the disorienting effects of Kethvoran presence. They learned to function while experiencing the visual distortions, the temporal discontinuities, the creeping sense of unreality that had broken the minds of so many Velethari warriors. They did not enjoy the experience. I saw more than one human emerge from training sessions pale and shaking, eyes haunted by what they had endured. But they went back in, again and again, until the madness became manageable, until they could fight through the horror rather than succumbing to it. "How do you bear it?" I asked Captain Tanaka, whom I had come to know well during those months. Her ship, the Persistent, had been assigned as my transport, and I had spent long hours on her bridge watching her crew prepare for what was coming. She considered the question. "Practice, repetition,
knowing that the alternative is worse. She smiled slightly. Humans have a long history of adapting to terrible things. Warfare, plague, famine, disaster. We've endured all of it. Our ancestors learned to function in conditions that should have broken them. That capacity doesn't disappear just because the horrors get stranger.
But the Kethvaron are unlike anything you've faced. They're not a disease or a natural disaster. They're an enemy from outside reality itself.
An enemy is an enemy, she shrugged. They can be studied. They have patterns, weaknesses, limitations. They can be hurt. Everything that can be hurt can be killed. Everything that can be killed can be defeated. Her eyes met mine. We're not special, Archivist. We're not braver or stronger than your people. We've just been pushed to our limits so many times that we've learned where those limits are and how to push past them when we have to.
I thought about her words often in the days that followed, watched the human soldiers training for an engagement that would likely kill many of them, saw them laughing together in the brief moments between drills, forging connections that would sustain them through the darkness ahead, observed the way they looked at the stars, not with the weary resignation I saw in Velathari eyes, but with something fierce and defiant.
They were afraid. I saw that clearly. But they had made a choice, all of them, to be afraid and fight anyway, to feel the terror and let it sharpen them rather than paralyze them. I had never witnessed anything like it.
The attack came 6 days before we expected it.
I was on the Persistent when the dimensional breach opened. Captain Tanaka had the bridge, as she always did. I never saw her sleep, though her officers insisted she occasionally rested. One moment, the stars ahead were steady points of light. The next, they began to bleed.
That was always the first sign. The stars themselves seeming to run, their light distorting in ways that hurt to perceive. Then came the wrongness, the sense of reality bending, of fundamental laws being violated by something that should not exist.
Then the ships came through.
Thousands of them, tens of thousands, more Kethvoran vessels than any single engagement had ever recorded. Their hulls twisted in impossible angles, geometries that seemed to shift when you tried to focus on them, surfaces that absorbed light and reflected something darker than shadow. On any Velathari vessel, this would have been cause for panic. Screaming, officers abandoning their posts, soldiers breaking under the psychological weight of what they were seeing. Captain Tanaka looked up from her tactical display and sighed.
6 days early. Guess they're eager. She keyed the fleet-wide communication channel. All ships, this is Persistent Actual. We have contact. Execute Operation Silent Dawn. I repeat, execute Silent Dawn. Let's show these bastards why you don't knock on humanity's door. The response was immediate and coordinated. Across the combined fleet, human vessels and Velathari remnants alike, ships shifted into pre-planned formations. I watched the tactical display as thousands of icons moved with a precision that should have been impossible for such a hastily assembled force. But the humans had been preparing for 50 years. Every maneuver had been drilled. Every contingency had been planned. Every officer knew their role so thoroughly that they could execute it half asleep and under fire. The first human ships to engage were the smaller craft, fast attack vessels designed for hit-and-run tactics. They swept toward the Kethvoran formation in waves, launching coordinated strikes at the probability anchors Dr. Webb had identified. The weapons they used were unlike anything in our arsenal. Focused reality beams, devices that somehow targeted the dimensional tethers keeping the enemy ships coherent.
The Kethvoran died.
I watched in stunned disbelief as the first wave of attacks collapsed dozens of enemy vessels, their impossible geometries unraveling as their connection to our reality severed. The ships didn't explode.
They dissolved, folding in on themselves until they simply ceased to exist.
Direct hits on primary anchors, Captain Tanaka reported, her voice calm. Enemy formation is destabilizing, pressing the attack.
More human ships surged forward. The Kethvaran responded with their own weapons, dark energies that erased matter rather than destroying it, probability storms that should have scattered any formation into chaos. Human ships died. I watched icons wink out on the tactical display, each one representing thousands of crew members consumed by the enemy's impossible power.
But the humans kept coming.
They adapted in real time, adjusting formations to minimize losses, focusing fire on the largest enemy vessels, sacrificing damaged ships to protect critical assets. They fought with a ferocity I had never witnessed, not the desperate scrambling of a dying species, but the controlled aggression of predators who had identified their prey.
The battle raged for 16 hours. I lost track of individual engagements, individual ships, individual deaths. The tactical display became a chaos of color and motion, attacks and counterattacks blurring into a single sustained assault. And slowly, impossibly, the Kethvaran began to fall back.
"They're retreating," I breathed. "They're actually retreating."
They're regrouping, Captain Tanaka corrected. They've taken heavier losses than expected, so they're pulling back to assess and adapt. They'll be back, probably with modified tactics. She studied the display for a long moment. But this was their main thrust, their attempt to break through to your core systems, and we held.
I sagged in my seat, trembling with relief and residual terror.
How many did we lose?
"Too many." Her voice was quiet. "Final counts are still coming in, but too many."
I later learned the numbers. 14,000 human vessels destroyed, 42 billion personnel dead. In a single engagement, humanity had lost more lives than they had lost in all of their recorded wars combined.
And they considered it a victory.
"You're still going to," I said slowly, "after losses like this, you're still planning to attack?"
Of course. She looked at me, and in her eyes I saw exhaustion, grief, and something harder than either. We knew the cost going in, Archivist. We prepared for it, trained for it, made our peace with it. She turned back to the display. The judgment is in position. Once our forces regroup and repair, we advance. We don't give them time to adapt. We don't give them space to consolidate. We push until they break, or we die trying.
"And if you die trying, all of you?"
Then we die trying. Simple. Absolute. A species that had decided what was worth dying for and would not be moved. But I don't think we will. I think they're going to break first. I think they've never faced anything like us before. Something that keeps coming no matter how many you kill. Something that learns faster than you can adapt. Something that treats impossible odds as a starting position rather than a deterrent.
She smiled, and it was the most frightening expression I had ever seen.
Humanity doesn't win because we're stronger or smarter or more advanced. We win because we don't know how to give up. We literally cannot comprehend surrender when survival is at stake. It's not courage, Archivist, it's stubbornness. Genetic, bone-deep, pathological stubbornness. She laughed softly. We're the species that looked at a planet trying to kill us and said, no, we live here now. The Kethvaran have no idea what they're dealing with.
The counterattack began 3 days later.
I watched from the Persistent as the Shadow Fleet assembled, the full might of human military power finally revealed. 42,000 ships had seemed impressive on a display screen. In reality, gathered in formation around the massive form of the Judgment, they were overwhelming.
The stars themselves seemed dimmer in their presence, outshone by the massed running lights of a species that had decided to go to war. At the center of it all, the judgment pulsed with contained power. I understood now why Dr. Webb had spoken of it with such reverence. It was not merely a weapon, it was a statement. A species that had been dismissed as primitive, as dangerous, as insignificant, had built something that could threaten entities from beyond reality itself. Commander Chen's voice came over the fleet-wide channel, broadcast to every ship in the Armada.
All hands, this is Commander Chen. In approximately 1 hour, we will begin our advance into Kethvaran-held space. Many of you will not return from this operation. You know this. You've made your peace with it, and you're here anyway.
Silence across the fleet. 80 billion humans, listening, waiting. I'm not going to pretend this is about revenge or glory or any of the things warriors are supposed to fight for. This is about survival. Not just ours, theirs too. The elder species dismissed us as children, primitives, a curiosity at best, a threat at worst. They spent millennia ignoring us while we clawed our way up from the mud, fighting for every inch of progress, dying in droves so our children might live a little better than we did. And when the darkness came, they fell. All of them, one by one, because they had forgotten what it meant to struggle, what it meant to fight for survival, not because you knew you could win, but because giving up was worse than dying. We haven't forgotten. We remember every day that the universe doesn't care if we exist, that survival has to be earned, that the cavalry isn't coming, because we're the cavalry now. I looked around the bridge of the Persistent. Every human officer was listening with absolute focus, expressions set with determination. Captain Tanaka stood at the center, hands clasped behind her back, watching the stars. Today we answer the call that no one answered for us. Today we stand between the darkness and everyone it wants to consume. Not because we're special, not because we're heroes, because someone has to, and there's no one left but us. From the darkness came judgment. Today, humanity delivers it. The fleet began to move. What followed was not a battle. It was a reckoning. The human ships swept into Kethvaran space like a tide of controlled fury. Where the enemy massed, they concentrated fire. Where resistance crumbled, they pushed through without hesitation. The Velothari vessels in the combined fleet followed in their wake, providing support fire and mopping up survivors, but it was clear from the first engagement who was driving this assault. The humans fought with a coordination that bordered on precognitive. Formations shifted before the enemy could respond, anticipated attacks before they materialized, exploited weaknesses that should have been invisible. Their losses were heavy. Every advance cost ships and lives, but they never faltered, never slowed, never gave the Kethvaran time to regroup or adapt. I watched world after world pass by on the tactical display, former Velothari colonies now corrupted by the enemy's presence. The humans did not attempt to liberate them. There was nothing left to liberate. Instead, they pushed past, driving toward the heart of Kethvaran-controlled space, toward the primary dimensional breach from which the enemy had emerged.
"We need to close the door," Captain Tanaka explained during a brief lull in the fighting. "Destroying their ships is valuable, but more will just come through. We need to seal the breach itself. That's what the judgment is for."
Will it work?
"We'll find out."
She said it so simply, as if the fate of the galaxy rested on a theory that might or might not be correct, and she had made peace with the uncertainty. as if hoping for the best while preparing for the worst was the natural state of existence.
Perhaps, for humans, it was. The final approach to the primary breach was the most costly. The Cathvaron had massed their remaining forces there, a last desperate defense of their gateway into our reality. The geometries were worse here. Reality itself seemed to bend and twist, the stars distorting into impossible patterns that made navigation a nightmare.
Human ships died by the hundreds. Their crews, trained to function under the psychological assault of the enemy's presence, held their positions until the end. I watched icons vanish from the display, each one a vessel full of humans who had known they might not survive and come anyway.
But they pushed through, meter by meter, ship by ship, life by life. The judgment advanced at the center of the formation, protected by everything humanity had left.
And then they reached the breach.
I had never seen it directly before. None of us had. The few Velathari scouts who had approached this closely had been consumed before they could report back. It was a wound in space, a tear in the fabric of reality that bled wrongness into the universe. Looking at it induced a physical pain behind my eyes, a sense that my mind was trying to process something that could not be processed.
The judgment moved into position. Its hull began to glow with contained energy, the pulse of its central systems accelerating from a heartbeat to a drum roll to a continuous vibration that I could feel through the deck plates of the Persistent. "All ships, fall back to minimum safe distance," Commander Chen's voice ordered. "Judgment is charging for primary deployment. Repeat, fall back to minimum safe distance."
The fleet retreated, pulling away from the breach in a coordinated withdrawal.
The Cathvaron, sensing perhaps that something catastrophic was about to happen, pressed their attack with renewed fury. More human ships died, sacrificing themselves to cover the retreat, to keep the enemy occupied while the judgment prepared.
Captain Tanaka stood at her command station, watching the tactical display with an expression I couldn't read. "Come on," she murmured. "Come on, come on." The judgment fired. There was no sound in space, but I heard it anyway, or rather, felt it, a vibration that seemed to pass through everything at once. Light erupted from the massive vessel, not a beam or a blast, but an expanding sphere of pure radiance that swept outward at impossible speed.
Where it touched Cathvaron ships, they dissolved. Not destroyed, unmade. Their probability anchors severed, their connection to our reality severed. They simply ceased to exist as coherently as they had arrived. Thousands of enemy vessels, gone in an instant.
And then the wave reached the breach. The wound in reality screamed. There was no other word for it. A psychic wail that bypassed all sensory organs and struck directly at consciousness itself. Every being on the Persistent staggered, human and Velathari alike, as the feedback washed over us. The breach twisted, contracted, fought against the force that was sealing it, struggling to remain open, to maintain the connection that allowed the Cathvaron to enter our universe. For a terrible moment, I thought it would succeed. The energies seemed evenly matched, reality and unreality locked in a stalemate that could go either way.
Then the judgment pulsed again, and again, and again.
Each pulse drove the breach smaller. Each wave of energy stripped away more of the dimensional anchors that kept it stable. The Cathvaron ships that remained tried desperately to reinforce it, pouring their own impossible energies into the tear, but they were being consumed even as they fought.
With a final, reality-shaking convulsion, the breach collapsed. Space healed. The stars stopped bleeding. The wrongness that had permeated everything since the Cathvaron arrival faded, replaced by the clean darkness of normal space.
The enemy ships that remained, those few that had survived the collapse, drifted without purpose. Their anchor to our reality was gone. One by one, they faded, dissolving into nothing as the collapsed probability space that had birthed them reclaimed them.
Silence. Absolute, profound silence across the fleet. And then, from somewhere in the combined formation, a human voice began to cheer. Others joined. The cheering spread across the fleet like wildfire. Human voices raised in celebration and relief and grief and triumph all mixed together. I saw tears on Captain Tanaka's face, the first genuine emotion I had witnessed from her in all our time together.
"We did it," she said softly. "We actually did it."
The judgment drifted at the center of the formation, its hull scorched and scarred from the energy discharge. Later, I would learn that the strain had been more than its systems could handle. The vessel would never fire again. Its probability manipulation arrays burned out beyond repair. A weapon built over 50 years, used once and spent.
Worth it. Every moment, every sacrifice, every life, worth it.
The war was over. The Kethvaron were gone. And humanity, the species we had dismissed as primitive, as dangerous, as insignificant, had saved us all. In the days that followed, I watched the humans begin the long process of recovery. They counted their dead, over 60 billion in the end, almost a fifth of their species, gone in a war that should never have been theirs to fight. They buried their fallen with honors, held memorials for the ships that would never return, mourned with a grief that seemed bottomless.
And then they got back to work.
That was the thing that struck me most in those aftermath days. The humans grieved, yes, but they did not collapse, did not retreat into despair or recrimination. They assessed the damage, allocated resources, began the long process of rebuilding their own fleets, their own colonies, and ours as well. "Why?" I asked Commander Chen as we stood on the observation deck of a station orbiting one of our reclaimed worlds. "After everything you've sacrificed, why are you helping us rebuild? You could demand tribute, demand submission, demand anything, and we would have no choice but to agree." She looked out at the stars, at the clean darkness that no longer bled. "Because that's not who we want to be." Her voice was tired but steady. "We fought this war because someone had to, because the alternative was letting the darkness consume everything, not because we wanted power or revenge or dominance." "But you have dominance, whether you want it or not. The elder species are gone. The Velathari are broken. Humanity is the most powerful force in this region of space." "Then we'll try to use that power wisely." She turned to look at me. "We're not perfect, Archivist. We're violent, fractious, prone to our own kinds of cruelty. We'll make mistakes, probably big ones, but we'll try to learn from them. That's all we can promise, that we'll keep trying." I thought about that for a long time. The Velathari had been ancient and wise and sophisticated, and we had failed. The Meridian had been even older, even more advanced, and they had fallen. All the elder species, with their millennia of experience and accumulated wisdom, gone. And now these humans, these children barely out of their planetary cradle, stood as the inheritors of a galaxy that had dismissed them. Perhaps that was the lesson. Perhaps age and advancement meant nothing if they led to complacency. Perhaps the only species that could survive the darkness were the ones that had never forgotten how to fight it. "I was wrong," I said finally, "about your people, about what you were capable of, about what you could become. She smiled, and it was gentle this time, carrying no edge. You weren't alone in that. Most of the galaxy was wrong about us. We were used to it. A pause. Maybe being underestimated was an advantage, gave us time to prepare without anyone trying to stop us.
That seems remarkably strategic for a species supposedly prone to self-destruction.
We contain multitudes, Archivist. She laughed softly. That's another thing about evolving on a death world. You learn to be many things at once, violent and compassionate, reckless and calculating, primitive and advanced. We're not consistent, we're adaptive, and sometimes that means becoming exactly what we need to be when we need to be it. I considered this, considered all I had witnessed in the past months, the quiet competence, the terrifying calm, the willingness to sacrifice, the refusal to give up.
What will you do now? I asked. With your power, your position.
Help rebuild, explore, learn. Try to be better neighbors than the elder species were to us. She shrugged. The usual. We're still figuring it out, to be honest. This is new territory for us, being the ones others look to for guidance. We're more used to being overlooked.
That will not happen again.
No. Her eyes went distant. I suppose it won't.
We stood in silence for a long while, watching the stars. The same stars I had contemplated my entire life, but they seemed different now. Less indifferent, less distant. They were still ancient, still vast, still utterly unconcerned with the struggles of mortal beings. But mortal beings had fought beneath them and won. Mortal beings had refused to be erased, had pushed back the darkness, had proven that even in an uncaring universe, what we did mattered.
I have been an archivist for 4 centuries, I said. I have documented the rise and fall of countless civilizations. I believed I understood history, understood the patterns that shaped the fates of species. Now I understand that I understood nothing. I turned to face her. History is not written by the oldest. It is written by those who refuse to let it end, those who fight when fighting seems hopeless, those who endure when endurance seems impossible.
She nodded slowly. We have a saying for that. History is written by the survivors. Yes. I let out a breath I had not realized I was holding. I believe I finally understand what that means.
I am old now, older than I was when this account began, though Velathori do not age as humans do. The centuries have passed, and much has changed. The Velathori sovereignty is rebuilding, slowly, painfully. We will never again be what we were. Our numbers are too few, our spirit too wounded. But we survive, we endure, and we learn. Humanity has grown beyond anything we might have predicted. They spread across the galaxy, not as conquerors, but as builders, as allies, as partners. They make mistakes, many of them, as Commander Chen predicted. They argue among themselves, fight over resources and ideologies and all the petty things that mortal beings fight over. They are not perfect, but they remember. They remember the war, remember the sacrifice, remember the lesson that the universe taught us all in those dark days, that survival must be earned, that hope must be fought for, that the darkness will always return, and someone must always be ready to push it back. I have made it my life's work to tell this story, to record it for all the species that come after, so they will know what happened and why. So they will understand that judgment came from the darkness, and humanity delivered it. Not because they were gods,
Not because they were heroes, not because they were special in any cosmic sense,
but because they were human, because they had learned in their brief and violent history that giving up was never an option, that fighting for survival was the only response to a universe that did not care if you lived or died.
The stars do not remember us. This is still true. They burn on, indifferent to our struggles, unchanged by our triumphs or our failures.
But we remember. That is enough. That has always been enough.
From the darkness came judgment, and humanity, stubborn, fragile, impossible humanity, delivered it with everything they had.
I was there. I witnessed. And I will never forget. Neither will the galaxy.
Neither will the stars.